Hello and welcome to this episode of Focus On with me, Giamo Mosipile. The upcoming Scientific Conference on Medicines Regulation in Africa, also called SCOMRA, hosted by Oda NEPED, is positioned as the premier continental forum on medicines regulation. Now set to take place in November, the event will bring together regulators, policymakers, industry leaders and global partners to discuss and shape how medicinal products are governed across the African continent. Now, to unpack this with me, I am joined by the head of the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Program, Chimwemwe Chamdimba. Ma'am, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to the show. Briefly, we just explored the upcoming conference, its significance and the role it plays in essence in governing medicinal regulations across Africa. But I want to understand from your point, this is a yearly conference. What is the significance of this particular event?
Well, as you have said in the introduction, but thank you for having me firstly. As you've said in the introduction, you indicated the important role that medicines regulation plays on the African continent. If you look at medicines regulation in Africa, it is important in ensuring access to quality, safe, and effective medical products to the people of Africa. And if we are to talk about responding to any public health needs of the continent, we require robust regulatory systems that will ensure that the medical products that we need to respond to the health needs of the African population are available when they are needed, at the time when they are needed, at the place where they are needed. And regulators are almost like the gatekeepers because they approve the medicines that go into their countries and they approve to ensure that they are safe, effective, and they are of good quality.
I think it's very important that you've highlighted the continued effort from various stakeholders and the need to harmonize and come up with a consensus on tackling health, which is also one of our most prominent sustainable development goals in particularly envisioning the Africa that we want. But I want to take a step back. I know you wear multiple hats. You are part of Oda NEPED, you're part of the Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Program, and you're also part of the African Medicines Agency. So looking at this top-down approach on the current regulatory landscape in health and medicine, where are we? Where did it begin? But more importantly, where are we going?
Well, I want to indicate that actually it is a mix. It's a top-down as well as a bottom-up. I indicated that when we were starting, the regulators themselves, national regulatory authorities, individually, each one of their own by themselves, looked within at the national level in the 55 member states of the African Union to say, what are some of the challenges that we are facing? Lack of standards, lack of guidelines. Actually also, the differences that were there, fragmenting the African continent as a pharmaceutical market. Because if I am a manufacturer, I have to navigate 55 different requirements. It makes the continent not attractive to both investment in research and manufacturing of medical products on the continent. And as a result, the continent realized we have to come together. Where do we do that best? And how do we approach it? The African Union becomes a natural home for that to happen. So that's the top, right? But the bottom is the challenges that we are facing and we are responding to are challenges that are at the bottom, which is in the member states. And countries come together collectively within the African Union and ourselves as the African Union Development Agency, being the development arm of the African Union, driving the implementation of priority programs and projects of the African Union, become a natural home for such convergence to happen, for countries to minimize that fragmentation, harmonize their standards, make the market for pharmaceuticals in Africa and the environment for manufacturing in Africa more consistent, coherent, and harmonized, so that as manufacturers enter the market, they don't navigate different systems. And that work that we have done over the years through the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization, working through the regional economic communities. Actually, we chose to work through the regional economic communities as a collective, as member states, because we knew 55 is difficult to work together. You can imagine it's difficult to work in just one country and bring together 55. It becomes very difficult to agree and harmonize. So we decided to work on the existing structures that bring countries together, which are the regional economic communities. So we started harmonizing in the regions, and that progress that we have made in the regional economic communities, adopting harmonized standards, harmonized requirements, and working together jointly to approve products within the regional economic communities meant that we had made a lot of progress. We needed to sustain it, and hence the African Medicines Agency, because the African Medicines Agency then becomes a natural spot for us to sustain the efforts that we have been implementing over the years, for us to ensure that we don't work as a project, because a project comes and goes, a program comes and goes, but an institution of the AU will live and continue responding to this continuous need to access to medical products for the African population. So you can see we have the architecture that is required to respond to our needs through these structures. And the conference that we are convening in November is actually coming at a critical time, because the African Medicines Agency is ready to go. And we are now ready to move from the harmonization project that we started in 2009, made progress from 2012 when we launched our first project in the East African community, moved to West, Central, East, Southern, as well as now North Africa last year. We are now ready to move to one collective intervention at the continental level through the African Medicines Agency.
I mean, you just made mention of how much of a mammoth task it is to, unify and come together with a single purpose for 55 member states. But two questions come out of mind for me. I think the policy framework is in place, ideologies are aligned, but when it comes to how it translates to the ordinary person, I think within African governments, the question still lies in terms of our own internal solutions, whether it be manufacturing our own, interventions to circumvent some of the issues we face on the African continent. Is there any practical example you can give in terms of moving the needle towards creating our own solutions to our own problems?
We have moved the needle as the African continent, and they are really tangible, significant milestones that we can point that have real impact on every African as a citizen, me as a citizen, benefiting from the interventions that we have done over the years. I talked about adoption of standards. That's at the high level. That's at policy level. I talked about coming together as countries to review applications of medical products in the regional economic communities. We have actually reviewed over 1,000 products, medical products in the regional economic communities through joint assessment and joint inspection of manufacturing sites. Why is that important? That really assures the quality, the safety of the products that the African population is able to access. When we adopted the African Medicines Agency Treaty, which we drove from our AMRH program for the whole purpose of ensuring sustainability of what we are doing, we then said, yes, at the continental level, we can come together, adopt standards and guidelines, but they will mean nothing if they don't really take a product application from the continental level, take it through to an approval at the continental level where countries come together, scientifically review that product application and make a recommendation at the continental level, which then countries will use to make national level decisions.
That means the continental pilot for listing.
Exactly. That is part of the pilot on the listing of medicinal. That's on the medicinal products. Another example I think that is really critical and practical that we can talk about is during the Mpox, outbreak that the continent is still facing until now. We came together with the Africa CDC to say, how do we respond? Because we need, diagnostics becomes an important component of any response to any emergency, because you have to diagnose for you to know the extent of the challenge and for you to bring in medical countermeasures to respond effectively. You firstly have to know the disease. Therefore, diagnostics become important. And Africa CDC noted that, we need to have approved products, diagnostics, that when they are approved at the national level, and they use that to diagnose the challenge, the Mpox, then we will be able to respond better. So we worked together with Africa CDC, did the first ever continental review of applications for IVDs, in vitro diagnostics for Mpox, which we recently approved And countries, including South Africa, have used that to make national level decisions that this indeed is an mpox diagnostic that need to be used in our country. So you see the impact that that has is that as I'm taking a medication or as I'm going to a lab for a diagnosis of a particular condition that I have confidence that I'm being given, firstly, the right medication that responds to the right disease because it has been properly diagnosed through an assured in vitro diagnostic, which we are approving at the continental level.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I'm almost at the end of the time, but I think for me, the one thing that I'd really like to know, I think you've given an extensive insight into some of the challenges that the continent faces, but more importantly, some of the interventions in place to tackle some of the persistent health issues and challenges we face. But quickly, in one word, what is it that this event or this conference aims to challenge or solve for the most?
What this conference will do, as the theme of the conference says, regulatory harmonization for unlocking trade and manufacturing of medical products on the African continent. That will ensure sustainable access and will build on the progress that we have made as a continent on regulatory harmonization to ensure that we use that progress to unlock the African continent when it comes to local manufacturing, which is sustainable access to medical products, and intra-Africa trade that will facilitate that we have access across the continent to the medical products that we need to respond to our public health needs.
I certainly think it's a long road ahead, but interventions like this certainly pave the picture that Africans are not just sitting on, their hands and waiting for help. We're coming up with our own internal solutions. I certainly think we could go on and on just exploring some of the examples that you've given us, but unfortunately, that's how we have to wrap up this episode of Focus On. Thank you so much to my in-studio guest, the head of the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Program, Chimwemwe Chamdimba, who joined us here in Johannesburg. From me, Giamo Mosipele, and the rest of the CNBC Africa team, it's goodbye for now.